Okay, so we've been working on Ringu. Okay, so today we're doing chapter 2. Okay, so there's a different chapter every day. So we said yesterday, okay, so we met them now. Do you remember what country they're from? India. Okay, and so they're from a town in India, and Korku, okay, is the group that we're talking about here, and they speak their language, and they also speak Hindi, which is another Indian language. And so when we talked about how, they do some pretty strange, kind of strange stuff, and they believe in kind of some strange ways. One thing they believe is they think animals are really special. So they'll they worship them and bring them gifts and things like that. And then we also talked about how they believe that there's an evil spirit. Okay. Now we know that Satan is there to try to distract us and get us to do different things, but they actually believe that there's like a spirit. There's this thing that's out there that makes bad things happen if they don't do something right. And so they have different ways of doing that. They have all kinds of weird things. Remember, his dad did something with the coconut. He broke the coconut. So because he broke the coconut, that was supposed to make the evil spirit go away. Yeah, see, that's not right. Okay. So we definitely have to make sure that we know our Bible, so that we can know God's word and know what his plan is for us. Okay. Now this story, remember we said this story about Ringu. Okay. It's kind of a made up story, but the things that happen in our story are things that actually do happen in his land. So they do believe in other things, and they do worship the animals, and they do really weird stuff when things go wrong, or try to stop bad things from happening. You really can't stop something from happening. If you walk outside and you trip and fall down, it's not like an evil spirit made you trip and fall down. See, their thinking is that if they walk outside and fall down, that somebody's mad at them, that the spirit is mad at them. And so, we know that that's not right. We just simply fell down. Okay, so here we go. So we found out that he hurt his foot. Okay, so he was getting ready for this festival of the bullocks, which are the big cows. And so he had to run with them. And so when he had jumped down off the wagon, he had hurt his foot. He got a thorn in his foot. It caused his foot to be really, really sore. Now, they don't have medicines and things like we do. I mean, Mom would take us in and she would wash our foot, and then we'd be okay. Okay, what, he had, remember the doctor that came in? Okay, that doctor was blowing in his ear, and he ties a feather around it with a string around his ankle, and he blew pepper flakes at him, blew pepper flakes and made him sneeze. And he was doing all these kind of things. I mean, Mom would just have us wash it, put some medicine on it, a Band-Aid. But they don't do that. And so his foot was getting worse. And so even he took and he put some, I don't know, some kind of black dirty stuff and kind of rubbed it in really, really hard, and that made it hurt even worse. So, okay, so that's what we talked about. So then the next day, he gets up and his foot, look at his foot. Ooh, that is just hurting. Now you can see he doesn't really wear shoes. All right. So that's why he steps on something. Okay. Wear shoes, put shoes on. So it's making him feel sick. And so he just kind of laid there, and then he got up to kind of go to school because he needed to get to school. Remember, he wants to go to school so he can learn how to read, because he's got that paper tucked up into his turban. And so he wants to be able to read it, but he has to learn how to read first. So he hasn't learned how to read yet. So he really wants to go to school. So he gets up and he goes into his mom, and he's like, Mom, I still feel horrible. It was making him feel sick to his stomach. It was making him feel his head hurt. He had a fever. I mean, he's just a mess. And so Mom calls in Dad, like, well, what are we going to do? And about that time, there was some noise outside, and they looked out the window and they saw someone coming. Now, it turns out that now they called him Grubs Saeed, which means Mr. Grubs. Okay. He's the missionary that's in town, and he was coming that way. And so Ringu's father actually goes out onto the porch and hollers out to him and has him come over. And he says, I need your help. We called the doctor yesterday. Yes, they called him a witch doctor, but we called the doctor yesterday, and he did all kinds of things, and it's not happening. And the evil spirits are still unhappy with us. And Grubs said, well, let me see what I can do. You fix my son. You make my son's foot better. He says, well, let me look at it. So he looked at it. He says, you know what? He says, I know what we can do. And he called out to Mom, and he says, bring me a bowl of warm water. And so she heated up some water and she brought it to him. And then he took some medicine and poured it in there and kind of mixed it up a little bit. And then he told Ringu to put his foot in the water. Normal, right? You put your foot in the water, wash it off. And they're like, no, we because there's evil spirits in the water. And what if we put his foot in there and then they get into his body? And they're like, no. Grubs, Mr. Grub Saib, he says, no, he says, put your foot in the water. And so they did. They put his foot in the water. Now it's very hard to trust him to put his foot in the water because they really thought that if they put their foot in the water, that there would be evil spirits in the water that would get into his foot. Like it would make it worse. No, just clean it. That it needs. But they didn't know that. See, this is a land completely different from what we have today. We know that with soap and water, obviously we have soap and water. We have to wash our hands all the time, don't we? Or sanitize our hands all the time now. All right. So we know that germs, we got to get those germs out by cleaning. They didn't know that. So very, very carefully, he stuck his foot in the water. And then he said, we're going to pray. Everybody bow your head. And so he prayed to God that Ringu's foot would get better, that the medicines would help, and that they would be able to get better. And you know what? Ringu realized that his foot was actually feeling better because they had done this. Now he told him, Grub Said, he said, you continue to do this. Do it a couple times a day. Put this medicine in the water and put your foot in the water and let it soak in there for a little bit and do that for a couple times. And that'll help your foot to feel better. Okay. So he left, and later that night, his foot started hurting again. He said, Mom, my foot's hurting again. I don't think we should do that water thing again. I don't think I should put my foot in the water again. And she said, okay, well, let's not do that then. But then the next morning, guess what? It was feeling even worse. In fact, he woke up and he says, oh, Mom, this hurts so bad. And she called in Dad. And Dad said, well, you know what we should do? We should try the water thing again. But what if it makes it worse? We have to try. And so that's exactly what they did. You see, Dad said, he says, I need your foot to get better because my workers are about ready to take a break during their festival time. The workers that he has takes a break. He says, I'm going to need you and your brother to go outside and watch over the bullocks and keep things safe so that nobody comes in and bothers them. And so you're going to have to take your turn soon. So I need your foot to get better. So let's try. So that's what they did. He let him soak it in again. And of course, he's got to get his foot better because he needs to get better for it to help Dad. And he wants to go to school. And so that's exactly what happens. So he tries that a couple more times and his foot was feeling better. In fact, well enough that he was able to go to school. And so he went to school, and plus he was excited. He took that piece of paper with him. Remember the paper, that little piece of paper that had God's word on it that he had tucked up in his turban? Well, he took that with him because he's hoping that when he gets to school that he will learn enough so that he will be able to read the paper, because he wants to know about the God that Saeed Grubs is talking about. Grub Saeed, sorry, switch those. So he wants to know about the God that he's talking about, because if the God can take away all of this weird stuff that's happening, that would be wonderful. And so they go into school. So they get into school and they sit down and they're listening to what's going on to the teacher, and the teacher's talking. Oh, it's going fantastic. And the teacher's counting. I mean, that's important because you need to know how to count things, but he wants to learn how to read. He's got that piece of paper. He had it out, kind of holding it in his hand because he wants to know what's going on. So he's doing his work and he had it in his hand, and the teacher walked by and took the note. I mean, if you were sitting in your seat, you had a note in your hand, I'd probably come by and take it from you and put it on my desk and, see what you're looking at later, take things away so you can focus on what you need to do. He needs to keep his focus on his counting. So he took the paper and he put it off to the side. And so he kept going, and, oh man, Ringu is now all upset because he's thinking, I want that paper. I want that paper so bad. I want to keep that paper. I want to know what that paper says. I haven't even learned enough yet to figure out what's in the paper. And so I want to know what's in the paper. The teacher took the paper. Okay, so later, the teacher actually reads it. Not happy. You see, his teacher believed in all this stuff, didn't believe in the true God that made everything. So he's putting his faith and trust, and he has statues, and he brings gifts to them, and he prays to his statues and does things like that, and does all these, odd things, like the coconut thing, to kind of keep the evil spirits away. And so his teacher doesn't know. So when his teacher reads the note, and he sees what it is, Oh, he knows immediately who gave it to him. No. And he says, no, no, oops, no, you should not have this note. And I don't want you to have this note anymore. I don't want you to get any kind of paper like this again. And he was kind of fussing at Ringu. And Ringu was like, okay, I won't get another paper like that. And do you see how his arms are crossed? Okay, so this is the way it was. If you crossed your arms and pulled on your earlobes, okay, so you cross your arms and you pull on your earlobes, that was a way of like major promising that you wouldn't do something again. And so that's what Ringo did, because his teacher was kind of like fussing at him a little bit. And so to make sure that he didn't do that again, because he thought he was doing something wrong. See, that paper, see, the teacher thinks that that paper is wrong. Because see, the teacher doesn't believe in what that paper says. And it talks about God, the God that made everything. And so he doesn't want Ringo to think about that at all. So he makes him promise, don't get another paper like this ever again. And he says, okay. And then the teacher took that paper and rolled it up and threw it in the trash can. So he promised he wouldn't get another paper like that. But at the end of the day, when everybody left, he was the last one in. And Ringo went and he got the paper that the teacher threw away. Oh, he knows that whatever message is on that paper, that it's going to be good for him. And I mean, he respects his teacher and he wants to obey his teacher. But at the same time, he knows that that paper is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. So he gets it. And his brother, Batu, his brother had gone with him to school. And he's like, we got to get out of here. We got to go. Don't get that paper. He's like, no, I've got to know what this paper says. I've got to figure out what this paper says. And so I don't know what the paper says. You don't know what the paper says.